But the Russian collusion narrative, it never stops because the Russian collusion itself actually never stopped. And we have also had development last week with the Justice Department. They charged a Russian-born U.S. citizen and former advisor to Trump's 2016 campaign with working for sanctioned Russian state television network and laundering the proceeds. It sounds awfully familiar, right? So the
Yep.
indictment was announced Thursday and alleged that Dmitry Simes, you might know that name from the Mueller report from back in 2018. He and his wife received over a million, and I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He and his wife received over $1 million, a personal car and driver, and a stipend for a Moscow apartment in exchange for work they did for Russia's Channel One since June of 2022. That network was sanctioned by the U.S. in 2022 over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Simes and his wife Anastasia, they have a home in Huntley, Virginia, that was searched by federal agents a few weeks ago, and they're currently believed to be residing in Russia. Now, Anastasia Simes, she was also charged with buying arts and antiquities for a sanctioned Russian oligarch, Alexander Udadov. Yeah, sorry. It's Russian names that give me some tough. And then storing the works in their home in Virginia before they were shipped to Russia. Now, I personally believe that search a couple of weeks ago that we talked about here on the podcast, while yes, it was probably directly related to these items and that Anastasia Simes were procuring for the Russian oligarch, it's likely also some connections to some counterintelligence surveillance that was being done on likely the entire family, given their connections to both political campaigns and Russian intelligence services here abroad. We'll talk about the connections to the Trump campaign in 2016 momentarily, but Simes led a Washington think tank, the Center for the National Interest, that was primarily featured in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. And he had numerous interactions with Trump campaign officials, including an instance where Simes sent Jared Kushner a letter detailing potential talking points for Trump about Russia and also passed along derogatory information about Bill Clinton that was then forwarded to other representatives of the campaign. The CNI, the Center for National Intelligence, national interest rather, was founded by former President Richard Nixon, which is already a mar. It started off the front foot. It like that organization helped arrange a foreign policy speech that you might remember at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, at which Simes introduced Trump and where Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak was present. Also, the CNI was responsible for that. I think they helped organize some kind of town hall where you remember what was the Russian agent's name with the red hair when she was like fucking all the Republicans to try and like cozy
Not
her.
Maria Butina.
Yeah, Maria
Maria
Butina.
Butina? I didn't know she was fucking everybody.
Maria Butina. Yeah, she was fucking everybody. Not everybody, but she had a list. She was going down the list. They were responsible for in part for organizing this town hall in which Trump actually called on Butina to ask a question. Like they set it all up so that she would be picked by Trump to ask a question. I think it was something by Hillary Clinton. I can't remember. There's video of it out there. You can just hit up the YouTube for that if you like. So like just the level of incest in that regard between all of the Russian agents surrounding the Trump campaign and
Yeah.
this guy Dmitry Simes, it's it's extraordinary. Like one of the things that I think, obviously, Mueller didn't have much of an option in this regard when it came to Bill Barr shutting down the investigation. Because let's be clear, that investigation was going on. It continued until the literal day they shut the doors on the office. Like we recently had that development where we learned about the potential Russian bribe that Trump and his campaign took. That was one of the cases being litigated by Mueller's team in court, literally until the day the office closed, even though we're just now getting developments about the nature of that investigation. I don't know if it's still ongoing, probably
What
not.
they did here with the talking points, the Russian talking points leading up to the election, 2016 election, is almost exactly what was being done with the Middle East and Tom Barrett when he was working on Trump's campaign. And what he was doing was he was passing talking points regarding energy and repealing Obama policies. And he was taking Trump's speech, giving it to heads of state
Yeah, these
in
foreign
the
agents, and they
UAE
were
and other
like
countries.
literally doing the edits and then giving
Yeah,
it back to him.
and giving it back to him too. And they're like, okay, we need him to say this publicly in this speech. And then, because I was reading when he was under indictment, I was reading the indictment and stuff and the testimony, and that they would tell him, they was like, oh yeah, Trump did good tonight, thank you, because Barry was trying to get,
You're trying to get a
he wanted
paycheck.
to do business over there, and he wanted to get an ambassadorship, I think, to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and this is also it's also in line with Mike Flynn trying to get those nuclear reactors going in the Middle East and to deal with the Saudis, right? So it's all this incestuous behavior where all these people are trying to get these payoff from these foreign governments and foreign dictators and foreign agents, and in exchange offering them either influence the United States or to the point of, like in Trump's case, lifting sanctions or changing U.S. policy. But it's also not much different from like the influence operation where they're paying all these right wing influencers to try and get them to spread Russian propaganda. But back to Robert Mueller quickly. I think one of the mistakes law enforcement made, obviously, like he didn't have much, like there wasn't much you could do with this in terms of, when Bill Barr was attorney general, like he was killing all these investigations once Robert Mueller's office closed. But I don't know the nature or the state of where the Justice Department was when Biden came in office. Clearly, I'm sure, you know, uh, Barr left a bunch of cronies in place to kind of obstruct as many things as possible. Upon the Department of Justice changing hands from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. But one of the things they clearly should have done is look. Now that I think about it, in March of 2021, when Garland got in office as Attorney General, what he was dealing with was a fucking disaster. It was like this massive, like the largest criminal investigation in the history of the United States ongoing in terms of rounding up people from, January 6th. And also, like in terms of like, he set up this private little task force to start looking at the top of the coup. So there was that going on. And it was just like getting everything back to normal. And we were operating in the middle of a pandemic. And it was just total chaos. Couldn't get his people in place because Republican co-conspirators in the Senate were blocking his confirmations. It was a fucking nightmare. But if there's one thing I would have placed a priority on, it would have been kicking, like reigniting this Russia investigation,
Yeah,
because
I
like
agree.
one of the issues with Trump and his cronies is if they do something and they deem it successful and they don't face any consequences,
Yep.
they just like they go back to the bag. Like they never stop trying to repeat the thing that they believe worked for them before, even if it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily successful. So if the DOJ had spent more time exploring the 2016 the Russian conspiracy, even though Bill Barr killed it, and had been doing some of the shit with like Dmitry Simes and such years ago, we probably would have been in a better situation than we are now. But I mean, I guess you can't turn back the hands of time. At least they're
Yep.
finally trying to clean up the mess. Actually, before I move on from the Dmitry Simes thing, another issue, like, so under the Trump administration, um, obviously there was a there's a lot of turnover in terms of the attorney general. Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, eventually ended up overseeing the Mueller investigation because his boss had to recuse himself because he was also meeting with the Russians. You might have remembered that. So one of the issues with like the scope of the investigation is that Rosenstein, he narrowed the investigation in terms of what Mueller can investigate, and with a Russian conspiracy to simply criminal activity, right? So there was also a counterintelligence aspect of this that needed to be investigated, and those investigations don't necessarily, or even typically, don't ever result in criminal charges, but they do result in intelligence operations, counterintelligence operations. Where we're trying to figure out the motive and the activities of the people involved in conspiracies such as these. So you monitor those, so you can kind of fight whatever the plot is. But uh, one of the things Rosenstein did is he told the FBI that Mueller was handling the counterintelligence investigation, and he told Mueller's team the FBI was handling the counterintelligence investigation. So we don't know if there was ever actually a counterintelligence investigation of the Trump Russia conspiracy under the Trump administration, because Rod Rosenstein was a fucking snake. May he rot in hell.
Well, that tracks. That's on brand for
Extraord-
the administration he was in.
Extraordinarily on brand, but
Wasn't enough to keep him his job.
well, I think part of the, I mean, look, he had to get out of there. I think his his leash was waning. You know, Trump was putting a lot of pressure on him to try and wrap up the investigation, and he just wasn't willing to do that. Like, he was willing to play interference to a degree, but he wasn't willing to do everything Trump wanted, including when Trump ordered him to fire Robert Mueller, and he was like, "Nah." Yeah. So, apart from that, you know, the Russian tomfoolery, Tim-foolery, it never stops. Ty.
Tempoolery.
Yeah.
Like that.
All right. The next topic, if you will.
All right. From Russian disinformation with love, the U.S. Department of Justice said it had seized 32 internet websites used by the Russian government in what the prosecutors said Wednesday was a covert campaign to interview in and influence the outcome of our country's elections. The DOJ stated the Russian-run websites covertly spread Russian government propaganda with the aim of reducing international support for Ukraine, bolstering pro-Russian policies and interests, and influencing voters in the U.S. and foreign elections, including the U.S. 2024 presidential election. The companies are allegedly operating under the direction of Sergei Kiriyenko, the first deputy chief of staff to President Vladimir Putin, and other members of the president's office. Kiriyenko directed Russian public relations companies to promote disinformation and state-sponsored narratives in a campaign to influence November's election, according to Merrick Garland. An internal planning document created by the Kremlin states that a goal of the campaign is to secure Russia's preferred outcome in the election. The sites we are seizing today were filled with Russian government propaganda that had been created by the Kremlin to reduce international support for Ukraine, bolster pro-Russian policies and interests, and influence voters in the United States and other companies. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco added that the three companies used cyber squatting, where hackers take over a seemingly familiar domain, as well as fake influencers and fake profiles to covertly promote AI-generated content and fake narratives on social media platforms. At least one of the seized domains was WashingtonPost.pm, in an attempt to mimic the Washington Post website.
Your professional customer service voice is impeccable. Like, in terms of this larger plot, like, there was this, like, Russian intelligence service document that laid all of this out, this campaign called Good Old USA Project, because, you know, obviously this is the, like, Russian view on kind of American culture, what they think of the effectiveness of their disinformation campaign, the results of which would align closely with the ideas of good old boy USA, whatever you want to think about that. It's quite funny. But one of the things they were doing, apart from, you know, this plot with paying the white wing, I can't do that all the fucking time because it's apt. But yeah, the right wing influencers and, like, you know, these inserting these Russian agents in close proximity to campaigns and elected officials, and this other issue where they're creating these websites that appear to mimic what you would consider to be a prominent news outlet, like this thing they did with the Washington Post, where it's not WashingtonPost.com, it's WashingtonPost.pm, where it'd be like, CNN.net or something, and they're like hacking these sites, taking them over, and then they're like building these websites that kind of replicate the legitimate website, except like they would feel like they'd populate the site with these fake AI articles and such that would spread this disinformation. And they'd also have these matching campaigns on social media where they use like AI to generate these accounts and spread the fake articles, and they'd have like a whole have a whole network of bots to have these like range of replies underneath to make it seem like it's organic traffic, so it could kind of fool. It's like if you were present for Twitter in 2016, then you remember what the bot army was like and how just extraordinarily overwhelming it was, but also how kind of stupid some of the bots were. Well, they're doing the 2024 version with Chat GPT, so the bots are a lot less stupid and look more like humans upon closer inspection, even though generally always some telltale signs. But that aside, like there's this whole campaign organized by Russian intelligence, ordered directly from the top, Putin and his aides on down, where they have a multifaceted plan to attack the 2024 election. And clearly, what we're seeing by the Department of Justice is some means of kind of mitigating some of the damage that could potentially do by maybe not arresting or even charging American co-conspirators here in the United States, but putting everybody on warning that, hey, we know what's going on behind the scenes. We're looking at everything you do. Keep that in mind, especially if you're an elected official thinking of taking some money or engaging in some kind of conspiracy. Because I would imagine we're going to have a number of unsealed indictments on, November, whatever, after the election's decided.
The thing is that because there were no real consequences or finding out phase from the Mueller report, there's one thing that Republicans are, and it's fucking arrogant. And they have been emboldened. And then Trump was in office, so they kind of had a little get out of jail free card pass or whatever you want to call it. And then after Merrick Garland was, appointed Attorney General, I think everybody was kind of, what's going to happen? And then it was like a month goes by, and nothing really,
6 months,
no fireworks really popped off.
And then by the time we got the Trump indictments, they were so limited that they didn't include any of the co-conspirators. I mean, it's extraordinarily emboldening for the bad guys.
Yeah, and so they just really, but by that time, MAGA was so brainwashed and poisoned. At that point, Russia could just pick up their ball and go home. Like the well was poisoned. The damage was done. And then you got the Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you don't have to pay her crazy ass. You don't have to pay her dumb ass.
So you say that, but I think, so part of the problem with the way right wing, the media echo chamber.
Did you say white wing?
Yeah, right, white, same thing. You know what I mean? Part of the way the echo chamber works is you do have to have a constant source of information or disinformation in that regard to feed it. Otherwise, it kind of just flames out, right? Because as you can tell, you see here now that President Biden dropped out of the 2024 election and Kamala Harris is the nominee. They don't actually really have any ammunition or information to attack Harris with, so they're kind of stumbling through the dark. And that's because apparently they've been relying on, Russian intelligence services to provide them with the information and kind of like the framing and the plot lines and everything.
Well, the whole Burisma and the Biden crime family thing.
Right. Now that all the narratives created by Russian intelligence are out of the window, the right wingers don't have anything to rely on because they haven't been doing any real work the past 4 years, and they don't know how to do this shit.
And they don't have the time. They don't have the time to kind of build that. You like how Trump, he starts planting the seeds. If I don't win, the election's stolen. He repeats that for 6 months. Moving up, they don't have that kind of time, so they're throwing so much shit out there and it's contradictory.
Yeah,
and it's all like they have nowhere to go.
And the reason why they're struggling so badly is because the right wing media outlets, they aren't actually media outlets. They're not covering developments in news. They're here to fulfill the purpose of spreading propaganda and misinformation in order to presumably help Republicans, but in some cases to help our adversaries. And without having like the sheet of information handed to them by Russian intelligence so they can read off in the fucking YouTube videos like Tim Pool does, like they're floundering. And that, and again, with these numerous indictments here and the seizing of these websites, it makes it a little bit touch and go for other right wing quote unquote media outlets to reach out to Russian intelligence and get their talking points, because you see what happens. Like it's potentially possible that not only will your handlers get indicted, but you could have a sealed indictment against you, or your friends could be cooperating with the FBI. Like it's tough, some tough shit. But again, obviously the solution there is to just cover the news.